Hey guys, we're back yet again for one more round of voters and voter turnout before the end of the school year, at least for 2020, which we're all looking forward to getting rid of. But this will be the last video for before Christmas break, and tomorrow you got one little small assignment, super easy, and that'll be that. We'll make it easy on you on the way out for 2020. We were talking about yesterday, voter registration is an ordeal in America. You have to voluntarily register to vote. We made that easier with the National Voter Registration Act so that you can register to vote at the DMV. Since then, states like West Virginia have made it easier with mail in registration, online registration. We talked about forms of voter discrimination yesterday and how we changed those with the Voting Rights Act and the different types of voter turnout that take place in presidential elections, midterms, and off year elections. And what we want to talk about today is who comes out to vote. You can make predictions about whether or not someone's going to come out to vote based on certain characteristics. The same way that we can make predictions about people's ideology and beliefs, we can determine whether or not they're going to come out to vote. And so, one of the most important factors is education, level of education. Finish this sentence for me in your head. The more education a person has, are they more likely or less likely to come out to vote? And with the increasing amount of education, you're going to get somebody who's more likely to come out to vote. If they have more education, they're more likely to understand both the system, how it works, how their vote matters, and the consequences of not voting. So they see that voting is important, they understand the system, and they're more likely to come out to vote. Education definitely matters when it comes to whether or not a person actually comes out to vote. Now, level of education, like I said, it's not a guarantee, but we're speaking very generally right now. People who have a college education or a master's or PhD are far more likely to come out to vote than somebody who does not have a college degree. While that's super important, education definitely matters. Let's also take a look at the issue of race here. Get it? A race car. Oh. Anyway, race actually matters in this too. In the United States, what race of people come out to vote more frequently? White people, black people, Hispanic people, Asians? Come on, what do you think? And the answer is this. Might surprise you a little bit. White people come out to vote more often. And you should be asking yourself, well, why is that? Is there something special about white people that makes them want to vote more than minority? Not exactly. Race is inherently connected to education. Traditionally, what groups of people had been denied education in this country? And we're talking about racial minorities. Now, racial minorities haven't always had access to the ballot box as white people, and they haven't had access to education either. And here's what's really interesting. If you take a group of educated black people and a group of educated white people, similar education levels, when you look at those groups, black people will actually come out to vote a little bit more. And the reason or the rationale for that is black people have had that opportunity less. There are adults today, black adults today, who still remember what it's like to be denied access to the ballot box. Remember, the Voting Rights Act did not come into effect until 1965. And so Southern states, remember, they were discriminating against Black Americans and other minorities through forms of literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses. Sometimes, of course, they turned to intimidation, but the legal obstacles they threw up against Black people were very effective at preventing them from coming out to vote. And so there are individuals who grew up in that environment and some who were still adults in that environment that are still alive today. So they understand that they haven't had the right to vote quite as long as other people, and they appreciate it a little bit more. Gender also matters when it comes to voting. Who do you think comes out to vote more often, men or women? Sorry, guys, we tend to not appreciate the ballot as much as the women do. Women have a slightly higher voter turnout than men do. And it's the same reason that black voter turnouts are a little bit higher than white voter turnouts when you got similar education levels. Women appreciate it more because they haven't had it as long, right? The things that you take for granted, like particularly if you're a white male, you take this for granted because you've never had to go without it. What we, if you have to work for something or you remember a time where you didn't have it, you appreciate it far more. Let's talk about age, okay? Age matters here as well. The older you get, the more likely you are to come out and vote. Old people come out to vote more often. You got like this little clip art of the old guy. Now, take a look at the percentage, and this is true of any election. Old people are going to come out to vote at higher rates than any other age group. And why is that the case? Old people have more to lose. You're going to find out that the older you get, you start to accumulate wealth. You start to think about the future and what's going on there and what kind of world you're leaving your children and grandchildren, and you realize the importance of voting. And so old people are going to come out to vote more often. There's always somebody, and if you were thinking it, it's okay because every year somebody says it. They're like, old people come out to vote more often because they have more free time. I'm like, no, that's not the case. One thing you do notice, and this happens every election too, look at the age group. Like you see that it looks like it's going to be a line that is completely trending upwards. But as people get into like their 70s and 80s, the voter turnout rate starts to level off and dip back down. Why is that the case for the late I shouldn't be laughing at this, the late 70s and early 80s people? Why does it start to level off there? And it's not because they're dying, okay? Dead people don't come out to vote unless you ask some people. But why is that the case? And the answer is a lot of old people simply become unable to get out to the polls, or they start to lose some of their mental cognition and they forget about it, or whoever's taking care of them uh, simply doesn't want to bother trying to get them to come out to vote. Right? That's your future, guys. All right. Somebody pick a good nursing home for me when I'm old. It's just all I ask. All right. Age matters in determining whether or not somebody's going to come out to vote. And your age group has the lowest voter turnout. Sorry for that as well, guys. You guys are going to have to step it up. Education, race, gender, age matters. Income matters as well, and so does I got ahead of myself. All right. Income matters. The more money you make, the more likely you are to vote. You will try to come out and vote and influence a government system that has helped you get to this point, and you will vote for candidates who will help you keep that wealth. That's not a bad thing either. You like a system that you've done well in, and so you're going to get out and try to influence that system that allows you to gain a lot of income or a lot of wealth. Marital status also matters in whether or not somebody comes out to vote. Married people come out to vote more than single people. And the rationale for that, what we can best figure is that married people are more prone to having children, and they start to think about the future and the world that they're going to live in. And they see that voting is important and good leadership is important. Uh, Older people or married people now, like adults like my age and beyond, they look at the situation and they're like, hey, we got to think about future generations. So if you look at these factors about, if you look at these particular factors about people and why they come out to vote or why they don't come out to vote, some of them make sense, and you can start to predict whether or not people are going to get involved in terms of voting. And remember, voting turnout in the United States is not all that great, okay? And I want to point out a couple things to you. Let's talk about this, what we refer to as the non-voting problem. People in the United States do not come out to vote as much as they should at all. And let's talk about this election. You had the most contentious election in American history, perhaps, or at least in recent American history, and I'm talking like the last 75 years, maybe. We only had nationally voter turnout. Remember, I mentioned this yesterday. Voter turnout was only about 67 or 68%. That means that 1 out of 3 eligible voters stayed home. That's really, when you think about it, you're like, wow, a third of the nation said, yeah, I'm going to sit this one out. West Virginia, looking just at our state here in West Virginia, we only had about 63% voter turnout. And that really bothers me because that's like, here you're barely over 3 out of 5. So 2 out of 5 eligible adults said, yeah, I'm gonna not vote. That's an issue, right? Now we're going to talk about reasons they don't vote here in a second. But take a look in your textbook if you've got it with you on page 431. And if you don't have your textbook, don't worry. I'm going to read some of it to you and let you know how this works out. And you see on page 431, there are two particular columns. They look at voter turnout uh, in two different ways. And we're going to look at the left column, percentage of voting age population that comes out to vote. And you look at number one in the world, Belgium, in 2014. Belgium had an 87.2% voter turnout. That's pretty darn good. And then you look at some of these other countries, they're all over, a lot of them are over 70%. And you don't see the United States on one of those until you look at the 2016 United States election, and it's like 20th on the list. And we only had 55.7% voter turnout in 2016. And that one was a pretty divisive election. So voter turnout in other countries, like when you look at modern democracies, American voter turnout is always pretty low by comparison. European nations who are largely democracies similar to us, they're way higher. They appreciate coming out to vote more often, right? And one of the big reasons, let's talk about this, reasons that people don't vote. There are a lot of reasons that people just make up about why they don't vote. And they're like, "Oh, I'm too tired," or "I didn't like the candidates, blah, blah, blah." But there are some legitimate obstacles to voting, and we want to talk about those. Or at least in the past, there have been legitimate obstacles, and constantly states are trying to correct those problems. And so, in the past, let's talk about this. First of all, what day is the election traditionally on? A Tuesday. Elections are always on Tuesdays unless it's a special election, and it's on a weekday, and most people have to work. Now, in 2020, we saw, because of the pandemic, this could be something that is alleviated by the fact that we had early voting. And not only do we have early voting, but we had widespread mail-in balloting that allowed for people to have plenty of chances and plenty of opportunities to vote. Now, that sounds really good in one capacity. Okay, you're like, oh, this is an opportunity. But what's the downside to early voting or a mail-in ballot? If you send in your ballots too early or you vote too early, something could come up in the election in the days leading up to the election that might make you change your mind about who you vote for. And so ultimately, let's say you send in your ballot a week early and some damaging news comes out about the candidate that you liked and it makes you change your mind. It's too late for you. That vote has already been sent in and it's going to be counted that way. There is no take back on it. Right? So the weekday, that issue, and a lot of people do have to work, but states have also passed laws, and West Virginia has laws like this too. If you want to go vote on election day, your work has to give you a certain amount of time to legitimately go and vote. Now, a legitimate obstacle is the fact that elections occur on weekdays, and another legitimate obstacle is inconvenient polling places. In the past, uh, polling places have been placed in spots where people can't always get to very easily. And that is a big deal in West Virginia. Our geography is very mountainous in a lot of places, and there are so many rural areas that getting to a polling place can be a real problem for some people. Not only do you have inconvenient polling places, but sometimes too, there's not enough polling places. Uh, like if you go to major urban areas, you have to remember that millions of people are crammed into cities that are not all that big. So there's a huge population density, and sometimes people simply don't want to wait in line to vote. And remember, there's not all Not all states, excuse me, not all states have the same election laws, and they don't, you know, they simply just do things differently. And a lot of people are simply not going to wait in line because they're like, I don't have the time for this. Right, so there are some legitimate obstacles to voting where people just need to get out, or and they can't do it. Work gets in the way, life gets in the way. Like I said, inconvenient polling places. A lot of people see voter registration as an obstacle too, and we mentioned yesterday that some countries use automatic registration. Um, I'm not sure if that's the best way to go, but it wouldn't be a bad thing to try. Right? So people have legitimate reasons. Those are legitimate obstacles in the way. The other reasons that a lot of people don't vote is simply out of laziness. They don't research the candidates, and in the past that might be a little bit tougher. But with the internet, there's plenty of information out there. Right? Now, the voting issues, and remember, voting laws vary from state to state. And if you go back again and look in your textbook on page 432, one of the things that they point out is states that allow same day voter registration. And same day voter registration is helpful because you could show up on election day never having registered to vote, but you get to do it there. Right. Photo ID laws, those are things that are a little bit of an issue right now in states. We mentioned that yesterday too. But elections are things that, we want to change in the future because we typically look at this and say we want to make it as easy as possible for people to come out and vote. And of course, we had the big contentious hoopla around the presidential election where the Republican administration, the Trump administration, said, look, we don't want votes counted that arrive after election day. And most states who do mail in balloting say as long as your ballot was postmarked by election day, then they're going to count it. And of course, the Trump administration didn't like that because a lot of the mail in ballots did not help their cause. Right. So voting's an issue in terms of what people do or don't do. And I want to show you a couple of things. Look at voter turnout over the years here in the United States and see just how frustrating it is when we've had voter turnout way high back in the late 19th century. And you can see that the voter turnout has been kind of depressing since then. Like I said, we get a resurgence this year in 2020, but it's hard to say what that's going to look like in the future. All right. Now, we'll talk about voting choices later on, but this is where we want to stop for today. Tomorrow, you'll just have a brief look at another free response question and just a small part of it that you're going to do. So, hopefully, you guys are having a good day. And when you hear this, I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas.